stage, and then I'd like to add some personal flavor to it. So Carlos is the vice president of the Club of Rome. He's an aerospace engineer and initiated his career as a lecturer and researcher in the systems dynamics at the Polytechnic University of Madrid, to get later engaged for many years as an entrepreneur in the digital sector in Spain, Switzerland, France, and Germany. He created and chaired until 2020 the Nexus Foundation to develop research on complex systems and responsible innovation. He is now devoted to promoting the emergence of a civilization shift towards equitable well-being within a healthy biosphere. Carlos advises UNESCO Chair of Global Understanding for Sustainability at the University of Jena and the International Bateson Institute, as well as the Sweet Ed project on transition to 100% renewable in Switzerland. He's also fellow of the World Academic Art and Science and a lecturer on circular economy at EPFL.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, that's why I had to create something for my own, which I would like to add to this. And yeah, I think some of these parts which I'm going to say he already showed, and I realized in talking to you that you already experienced this, which I would like to share my impression and how I got to know Carlos. So besides his impressive career and his broad experience, he has a lot more to offer, I would say. And I got to know him as a really great conversation partner, to have deep discussions on difficult topics. He's listening to connect, relate, and understand, and fostering intergenerational dialogue. He's an open-minded and passionate thinker, embracing complexity and applying his knowledge, ancient wisdom, and modern science to sense-making. He's also a realistic dreamer, imagining whole system change and transformation on all levels for emergence of new civilization, being fully aware of the current situation and what is necessary to meet its needs. And combining all of this, he's an inspirational encounter, being humble and saying that serendipity was mainly involved in him now being able to serve as the vice president of the Club of Rome. He's being open-hearted and willing to learn what it takes for bringing his dream of the collective human well-being on a healthy planet alive. And with this now...
Wow.
With this now, Carlos, I'm so happy to open the stage for you, and welcome again. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you to you and to all of you. I mean, I'm so happy to be with you, ladies and gentlemen, today. So I will continue the provocation, but also give you some information about the Club of Rome and what we are doing now, in particular in this program of which, without knowing it, you are already part, you know, because of course you are part of the fifth element itself. And when we decided to use this expression, we deliberately wanted to do several things. The fifth element is life. It comes from ancient traditions, you know. We'll come back to that later, of 4 elements and 1 mysterious thing, which is life, which is energy, living energy, qi for the Chinese. And we deliberately wanted to use that as something which we cannot appropriate. We cannot say, oh, this is ours. The fifth element is everybody, is the whole of humanity. So you are part of that at that level, but you are also part of that at the level of what we do, as you will see. Even in the, it's very interesting when we discussed with Lutz and Mauricio about how the setup, even at the level of, this is exactly the kind of meetings we're having, you know, in circle, more or less this number of people, in a warm way, to have conversations where things can emerge. Oh, thank you. So the Club of Rome, maybe some of you have heard about it. Just want to give, no, I will not tell the whole story, of course, but give a little bit of background. In the 1960s, I feel the world was sort of more open to very strange things, you know, like the fact that this gentleman who was a top level executive, a businessman in Italy, he started the business of Fiat in China in the 1930s. It's almost a century ago. Now everybody is going to China, you know, but in the 1930s, that was another story. So he was definitely a businessman in Fiat, in Olivetti, working especially abroad, in China, but also a lot in Argentina. And he was at the same time a humanist. He was not, I think, yeah, unfortunately, I never met him, but I'm convinced he was not splitted. He was not a fragmented human, you know. He was a whole human all the time. And so he was also a humanist and a visionary. And he got engaged, and I have difficulties to imagine somebody, some business leader of today with these characteristics, you know, because everything is more squared and framed into boxes, etc. Because he was also engaged, I mean, committed. He was part of he engaged in the resistance against fascism and the Nazism in Italy in the Second World War, and he was jailed and tortured, etc. So he lived through these kind of experiences as well, which is quite impressive. So he initiated something which he didn't know what it was, and I love that part, you know, that to start a dialogue, a conversation about the challenges of humanity in the last third of the 20th century, which if you read this speech given in Buenos Aires in 1965, some words have changed, you know. So it was still the times of First World, Second World, meaning the communist countries, and Third World, etc. Some of the language is not anymore valid, but the questions are still very much valid. And if you ask me what does the Club of Rome it's even less than an elevator pitch, is on a short sentence. I say, when we are good, we ask better questions. Nothing more, but nothing less, you know. When we are good, we ask better questions. And that started with him, you know. He started asking very good questions at a level where nobody else was doing that at the time. He was deeply concerned by the future of humanities in ways which were very much anticipating where we are today. And he, together with a short group of other people, quite extraordinary, they said, well, we have to adopt a perspective that nobody else is taking, you know, this perspective, global, long-term, and systemic, focusing on interdependencies. Now, this is very much in the discourse of many people and many organizations nowadays, you know. Another matter is if the reality lives up to the discourse. But at the time, that was a breakthrough, and at the same time, it was embedded in a spirit. So it wasn't, of course, it's not only the Club of Rome, you know, we are the guys, you know, who make miracles or whatever. The existence, the birth of the Club of Rome was also embedded in a spirit of a time where extraordinary things were happening in different places. It was founded, I should have put the date here, because it was founded in 1968. So the year when almost everything was happening at the same time, good and bad, you know. So it was embedded in that spirit of that time, which was a very open-minded spirit, if we compare it with today. And they coined an expression, the word problematic, about the big challenges of humanity, which are all of them interrelated. There is not one challenge that you can separate from the others. You cannot separate, you know, the social, the economic, the environmental, challenges. And they decided, okay, let's create a space of debate. That's also important because they never had the ambition of crafting the responses. To say, I mean, there are several, if you wish, there are, one of the things I love in the Club of Rome is that it's a very diverse organization. It's an association, actually a Swiss association based in Winterthur since 12 years, of 100 and something people all around the world with very different backgrounds, from science, politics, activism, business, and science, different domains of science for sure. Very diverse background, and with this spirit of we don't have to have the same opinion. We don't. It's this space is for debate. This space is to try to identify better questions, but not necessarily to respond them and say yes, this is the solution. And with that spirit, it started asking questions. And now this is a little bit where we are now. In 2018, that was the 50th anniversary of the Club of Rome. So we decided to question ourselves. What is the role of the Club of Rome in the 21st century? And what do we don't want to do? And how do we want to continue being relevant? And we did a number of things, like organizing ourselves as a platform, meaning by that we are much more open than in the past to collaborations, to partnerships, and to develop activities and projects with others. We're a small thing, you know, but we definitely don't want to be an ivory tower of all the most intelligent people on the globe who are designing the solutions for the rest of the people. No, but more, yeah, agent provocateur for sure, but in constant contact and collaboration with others. That was a significant shift of the operations, of the mode of operations. We defined what we call 5 impact hubs. Emerging new civilizations is the one I'm taking care of together with youth leadership and intergenerational dialogues, but there is a lot about planetary emergency, I mean, which in 2018 was not so obvious. Now, after COVID, after everything, you know, I think, yeah, we got it. I mean, I think many more people are getting that we're in planetary emergency, but at the time, what's not so obvious. And 2 hubs on specifics, if you wish, on what kind of economic thinking is needed and what kind of finance is needed for the future, for a sustainable future, for the continuation of the history of humanity on Earth, because it's about that. Let's be honest, it's when we say sustainability, it's just about, is there a place on Earth for us in the future, you know, or is Gaia getting rid of us, you know, because it looks like, you know, Gaia is saying, oh, Gaia, this human experiment, it has been nice for a while, but now it's becoming really harmful, you know. So, and we did something else, which is not here, but is extremely important, which is that we elected 2 ladies co-presidents of the Club of Rome. We already had a tradition of co-presidencies. We elected Mampela Rampele from South Africa, who initiated in her 20s, together with Steve Biko and a few others, the Black consciousness movement in South Africa. That's another thing, exactly the same year, 1968. Which was a lot about the Black consciousness movement, was a lot about what we have been discussing here before. It's fascinating, you know, to see how much connections there are with this discussion and what they were starting to do in South Africa, of course, in the context of apartheid, and it was against apartheid, but from this perspective of what about our liberating ourselves from our mental jails, you know. Mampela Rampele from South Africa and Sandrine Dixon de Clève, who is Belgian, based in Brussels. And she's very strong. I mean, both are very strong, charismatic. Cynthia knows well Mampela, and very strong and charismatic persons. And Sandrine has been for many years working in the context of the EU institutions and the multilateral institutions, etc., trying to push the lines, you know, of what happens there. So that we did, and to renew, in a way, the Club of Rome, for the people who know it, many people don't, but for those who know it, they most probably know it because of this book, The Limits to Growth, which was published exactly 50 years ago, which was asking this question that I put there: does prosperity lead to collapse? Which was a crazy question by the time, you know. Nobody was considering that. I mean, we were still in the context of progress, the progress of humanity after the Second World War. Humanity, question mark, because in most of the world, that progress was still framed in colonialism and now in neo-colonialism, etc. But in the first world, as called at that time, it was very much the framing of, oh, progress, technology, industry, etc. We are developing a better world for everybody. And so this question was a bit crazy at the time, you know, why the hell? And it came from the concerns of Aurelio Peccei. So he was not directly involved in working out. This was done by a team at MIT, a team of systems modelers, and led by the Meadows, Donella and Dennis Meadows, although they built on the previous work of, at the time, the most knowledgeable person on systems dynamics, who was Jay Forrester, and they built a model to simulate different scenarios of the future. And the response to this question was not one. It was because there are many scenarios in that book, but many of them, most of them, showed the probability of collapse of our human civilization, you know. This is the central scenario, the business as usual, well, standard run in the terminology of the original book, which shows, you know, the possibility of collapse. Now, you know, as you see here, we are around mid of this century in which we live now, with the population collapsing because of a combination of explosion of consumption of natural resources. So the exhaustion of natural resources and the growth in pollution, the combined effects of both trends would lead to collapse in the model, which of course is a model, and all models are wrong. Some are useful. That's a typical saying of, that's a typical saying of modelers, you know. Or at least wise modelers, those who know that all models are wrong, but some are useful. I think this one was useful at least to provoke, to create a big provocation. And it did. The book, interestingly enough, because I can tell you this is not a novel, it sold millions of copies. I'm not going to say it is boring, no, but I mean, it's not a novel, not an exciting novel. It sold millions of copies, but it didn't change the course of things, actually. It looked like it could because of this impact, you know, of media impact, controversies. Governments were listening at the time. Even Jimmy Carter, then president of the United States, made a discourse on television. So building on some of the questions which were in the book, you know. But then the winds changed. I mean, there was a lot of backlash as well of pushing back in particular by economists, you know, saying these people are questioning growth and not hearing part of what was in the book. And the part that I particularly emphasize is this was not a doomsday prophecy. It was not a prediction. But it was categorized as such by the people who didn't want to hear the main message. you know, and that was used very effectively to put the book in aside, you know, doomsday, these guys are doomsdayers, don't listen to them. And Ronald Reagan said in a public discourse, there are no limits to growth, literally, in response to that, and forget about them. And that's unfortunately what happened. And the winds change. I said that politically speaking, with the coming of Thatcher in the UK and Reagan in the US, you know, these questions about will we have issues with the kind of model of development, because it's about that in the end. It's is this kind of model of human development based on material consumption and ever-growing levels of material consumption, is this sustainable in the future? That discussion, which is now everywhere, was ignored. And what was ignored was also that the book, the main message for me of the book is we have the choice, talking about making decisions. Humanity, because some of the scenarios were showing the possibility of balancing, of avoiding collapse, you know, that appeared in some of the scenarios. So something could be done, but that was ignored. Until massively ignored until relatively recently. So I just put this as an example. And if you take a moment to follow what Antonio Guterres is saying now, he has become an absolute radical on the need for transformation. But this is very recent, because I was in this web summit in Lisbon in 2017 when he said this, you know, that basically was saying, oh, everything has been going well in the last decades with globalization and technological development, with some collateral damage. And I almost jumped out of my seat when I heard collateral. How can you use that word on climate change and rise of inequality? These are self-destructive trends, you know, with the potential of of really doing what he says now, committing suicide of humanity. But he shifted, you know, for whatever reason. I mean, whatever reason, one of them is, I'm sure, is COVID. So COVID, I don't know the perception you have, but my perception is that it opened very much the minds of people to, one, the possibility of collapse, because that was it. We collapsed from one day to the next. We had to change completely the way we live, you know, and get out of the way we used to live. And to the seriousness of this matter of the relationship with nature. So I know that many people, after all, say, oh, but what is important with COVID is that we were able to develop vaccines in a very short time. True, but true as well. But what about our relationship to nature and the fact that COVID came out from the destruction of the ecosystems, you know? So I think for many people, it was really a moment of mind opening. And I think that was happened with Antonio Guterres, no? Because if we look at this idea of sustainable development, so to a certain extent, the impact of the work of the Club of Rome was to contribute to the spirit of, which led to the crafting of this concept of sustainable development in 1987. And this is, again, a very simplistic representation, but this shows the map of countries. So the dots are countries. The Human Development Index is something that the UN elaborates based on GDP per capita, levels of health, life expectancy, etc., and levels of education in the different countries. And this is the number of Earths. The ecological footprint, for instance, measured in number of Earths, is a concept which was developed by two colleagues in the Club of Rome, one of them from here, Bill Rees and Mathis Wackernagel. They created, who is a good friend of Heiko and mine as well. And they developed this concept of ecological footprint, and they are not only the concept, but they set up the organization in order to be measuring. And Number of Earths, meaning how many Earths do we need to sustain our lifestyle. And what you see here is that the countries, no one is in, so this is sustainable. This is a quadrangle of sustainable development where you have high levels of human development index and levels of ecological footprint compatible with the Earth, with the world, what they call the Earth biocapacity. So all countries are outside. And the most terrible thing is that they are not, they should converge, you know. All of them should move in this direction. I mean, the ones here should go this, and the ones here, they don't do that. The typical evolution when there is development is that, and we're showing they have a good one on China and how it moves, you know, and China moved in that way, you know, going from here to somewhere here, but not getting here. Sustainable development is an oxymoron, so sorry to say, for now. Which means, in my view, that we have to question what we understand by development, human development, because the Earth is what it is. And it is, the ecosystems are in danger, but it's humanity which is in danger. You hear often, save the planet. Come on, the planet will be here until the sun explodes. And that's far, far, far away. Life will be here without us. No, we are in danger. Yes, of course, we are destroying many ecosystems, killing many species, etc. But life will continue. The question is, are we able to continue? Or, I mean, you know, some people are starting to think crazy things that, oh, now we have burned the Earth, let's move to another planet. Let's continue our mission of burning places until the very end, you know? And is that human development? Is that the being that we need to have? I guess no, but and it has to do with what is a decision, what is a human decision, and how it is made, because life started with bacteria. In my life, I have experienced that have made changes in the way in what I eat, which have not been decisions from a rational mindset. So I don't know. I describe this with a metaphor, which it's probably not accurate, but there is some kind of mystery about how do we change. My metaphor is that at some point, the general assembly of my bacteria decided for me that I should stop eating or drinking some kind of things, you know, and eating or drinking others, because it was my taste. If you can justify that ex post, you can rationalize that based on, oh, but it's better, it's more healthy. You know, yes, but I promise it was not a rational decision that I implemented. It didn't work that way. It happened that my body changed and my taste changed. And I didn't do that by myself. So maybe the general assembly of all bacteria in the world, I mean, maybe you have heard you saw one of the memes during the pandemic at the very beginning, which was a conversation between the world, meaning humans, and the Earth. And the world was saying, you know, we have been trying to change because, yes, climate warming, all that. But it's so difficult to change, you know? I mean, well, we don't find a way. And the Earth answers, oh, you don't find a way. Okay, I will send you a virus. And in no time, we changed. So I know that sounds a bit esoteric, but there may be also a rationality and a way of knowledge in this system of Gaia, you know, trying to preserve itself, you know. And anyway, we are not doing sustainable development. One of the things we did this year, on occasion of the 50th anniversary, we published two new reports. One is Earth for All, which is more the approach of what kind of policies would be needed to get out of this perspective of collapse, and identifying a number of areas around women and empowerment of women, around transition to renewable energy, around transition of agriculture to regenerative agriculture, around fighting inequality, and around development for the countries where, you know, well-being is below what we would expect. This is the book on calling for the rational approach, you know, and identifying a number of policies, but actually asking also these questions. This question: why are decision makers still failing to make the right choices? Which connects so much with this conversation here. How do we take decisions, and how that come from? Where that's come from? In my view, it connects, that question connects with something that has been ignored in the history of the Club of Rome, but sorry for that. But for me, this book is at least as important as the Limits to Growth, and it's the issue of the human mindset. Interestingly enough, Aurelio Peccei was completely aware of that, and he realized that, especially after, we sold millions of copies of the Limits to Growth, but nothing happened. We continued in the same pathway of self-destructive development. So he started talking about the human gap, the difference between our capacity to act and our capacity to understand the consequences of our actions and to deal with them. Say, well, in the end, it's our capacity to deal with complexity, you know? Very much at the same time, it's the magic of these coincidences. A very important thinker of the 20th century, Gregory Bateson, was saying that the difference, the biggest problems we have come from the difference between the way we think and how nature works. The same gap, you know, the same gap between the excessive importance that we have given in modernity with a capital M, to the rational thinking and to the mechanistic, particularly to the mechanistic approach, and that to the idea that we can understand reality and we can describe it, and once for all, you know, it's a version of science which is reducing the complexity of science itself. It's often not the vision that scientists have of their own work. It's more the vision that others have about the role of science, and in particular the vision that power has about the role of science, to give explanations and to give the possibility to control. But we cannot control life. And in my view, we probably will never be able to understand it from our conscious mind. One big thinker also of the 20th century, Edgar Morin, wrote a few years ago a book, a very short book titled Knowledge, Ignorance, Mystery, where he makes the point that whatever our level of conscious, rational knowledge, there will be always a mystery that we cannot grasp, because life is bigger than us. Can we understand something of which we are part? Can we understand the whole? Can we understand in the sense of rationally describing, but even worse, can we control the whole? So this book was about, you know, our capacity to learn and how the infinite potential of learning that we have. And a few years later, Aurelio, together with a Japanese poet and philosopher, Daisaku Ikeda, they wrote a book of conversations titled Before It Is Too Late, where they called for the human revolution, for a human revolution, a revolution of mindsets. 84, 40 years ago. I think we are living that human revolution, but we just don't notice. It's not on the main stage of Davos, of the WEF, I mean, not the, I have nothing against the city, not on the main stage of the WEF, but it might be happening now, here, and in many other places, and everywhere maybe, and maybe it's good that it's not on the main stage. Because sometimes, I mean, the world in which we live now brings also a lot of questions about the role of visibility and putting yourself in a visible position, and the role of, I mean, with social networks, etc. You know, beware of being visible. Maybe these are things which have to mature and grow and emerge. You use the word emergence. Before, you know, before being too visible. But the human revolution is exactly what we are trying to work on. Sorry, this pointer is a bit erratic in its. No, that's okay. I think and I mentioned we published this year the report Earth for All. But we also published this book that I co-edited together with Professor Ugo Bardi on making, you know, it's a book which starts with the limits of growth, with the contributions by, among others, Dennis Meadows himself, who is still alive, and Jürgen Randers, who was co-author of the Limits of Growth. Coming from there, what happened since then? Where are we today? And what does the future look like in terms of possibilities of thinking otherwise, of thinking in different ways, you know? And of my chapter, which is the last, is learning what we already know. Making the point that knowledge and learning are two different things. And I would say even more, education and learning are two different things. When I say learning, I'm talking about changing. Something I think we have learned from life, because we know actually a lot about, coming back to Bateson, this point of how nature works. I think we know a lot about how life works, but we don't use it in our societal arrangements and so. So we know that, of course, living beings and living systems and ecosystems are all the time changing. And at some moments, at some critical points, and some people who were members of the Club of Rome, like Ilya Prigozhin in the 70s, worked very much on that point of criticality. It is the moment where you get to this critical situation, which can lead you to collapse and to terrible things that we are seeing every day, is also the moment where the space of possibilities opens. It's also the moment where emergence can happen. The emergence of something new, of new forms. In the history of life, in the evolution of life, it is very clear there, of course, evolution is all the time working, but at some points there is suddenly an extraordinary explosion of new forms of life. So the possibility, that's the possibility that we try to invoke, this possibility of emergence of something new, more attuned to life. So reconciling, making peace with the earth at this moment. And that's the learning versus what we already know, but we decide to ignore. I mean, for many reasons, some of them might be good even. But there is something important also connected with the previous conversation, is that we don't have access to reality. In the last centuries, we developed, you know, this idea that science, again, a simplified version of science, in my view, science can help us to understand everything. and it's always progressing and cracking new mysteries. At the same time, my view is that the moment that happens, the mystery grows. The whole mystery is actually growing because we're bringing more complexity. So we will never get to the point of we know everything. But there is a fundamental issue of consideration in my view, which is we don't have access to reality. We receive perceptions from reality through every piece of our body, all our senses, every square millimeter of our body is getting signals and perceptions of reality. And then a lot of that is processed in an unconscious way. And it has to be. We wouldn't be able to process rationally the zillions of, ongoing living processes in our body, which keep our body alive and healthy, Some of that comes to our conscious mind. But what happens there is that we interpret those perceptions according to some frameworks that are generally unconscious, or we are not so much aware of which framework we are using to interpret things. And that naturally creates blind spots, things that we don't see. Because we are thinking in a certain way, and we don't see something which is there, that we are perceiving, but we neglect the importance of that. Or we don't want to see. Probably the worst blind spots are those things that we don't want to see, that we see, but we don't want to recognize. So this is why knowledge and learning are so different. And learning, in my view, is a process of change, which is mysterious and which is embodied, involves all capacities, or it doesn't happen. We were talking with Brigitte, I was mentioning to her that the very last paper that Donella Meadows wrote was titled Dancing with Systems. Because she realized she came from a perspective, a systems thinking perspective, but quite mechanistic. She developed a whole theory of leverage points. You might have heard about that. Leverage points is still a mechanistic metaphor. But at the end of her life, she was in this, wow, there is something which is beyond rational understanding that we have to attune, to have to find the melody of, to dance with the systems if we want to change, which I think is, and this is why this book is dedicated to her and Lynn Margulis. I don't have time now to talk about Lynn, but another extraordinary lady, women have been very important in the history of systems thinking. That's very interesting, a very interesting topic in itself. Lynn, again, as Donella, unfortunately, died very young. So the question we're asking ourselves, one of them now is a human revolution emerging, and how could we help? How could the Club of Rome, and the people, some part of the Club of Rome in particular, directly engage with this question? How could we help? Of course, we wouldn't address this if we didn't think that the revolution, the human revolution, is already emerging. And then we had these discussions internally about how do we call this, And when we were thinking about these things, in a conversation with a lady, she said, well, but what is interesting is that we can frame the challenges we face in terms of 4 elements of ancient traditions, And it's easy, relatively easy to say, oh, climate warming, yeah, the connections. Look at all, particularly the environmental issues. You look at them and you can connect them with the 4 elements, which are, of course, elements, not the periodic table of chemical elements, but fundamental elements for our life, without which we cannot live. And then I had an inspiration coming from nowhere, I don't know, from the mystery, and said, oh, I know how we will call this initiative. We'll call it the fifth element. Because it's obviously about that, about life and about reconnecting with life and learning with life, you know? Use this slogan of life for learning and learning for life. How can we learn? How can we bridge that gap that both Peche and Bateson were talking about 50 years ago, you know? And well, number of people that we are a team working on this. Heiko is part of that team, and we're having a very funny times, very intense, but also very funny because it's so warm, you know, in a way, because what it is, I mean, the fifth element, what's that? It's not, we cannot describe that as a project, as a usual project with a work program and work packages and KPIs and all that stuff. No. It's an invitation, first of all. So just, I mean, I'm inviting you, but just for you to know that you are already part of that, the fifth element. It's a really open invitation for conversations first. We thought, yeah, we have to start with having the conversations that are not happening at the main stage of WEF, but not at the main stage of WEF. They're not happening anywhere in public spaces. It's terrible, terrible. Last week I was in Geneva for something called Building Bridges, a big conference organized by the Geneva financial community on sustainable finance. Terrible thing. I mean, yeah, no, I mean, but many, I mean, it was really interesting, and some of the people were very open and honest, and but terrible thing in the sense that we organized a session, which was on the last day, and in that session, simply by opening the floor to conversations and to letting people express what they are living and what they feel, there was an explosion of energy. After 3 days of a mix of greenwashing, of technicalities around acronyms, and whatever sector you are working on professionally, if it is business, you deal with plenty of acronyms, but sustainable finance, I mean, wow. ESG, TNFD, TCFD, I mean, so a lot of technicalities about that. But also a lot of, well, we cannot do anything. The vice chairman of BlackRock, largest asset manager in the world, basically said we cannot do anything. Not literally, but almost. Unless somebody who is not in the room, the politicians, fix this mess. And why did you come to a conference titled Sustainable Finance to say that sustainable finance is impossible, that is not in your hands, that you are powerless? You are vice chairman of something called BlackRock, but you are powerless? Really? But there was something even more, which was the whole dialogue was so soulless. Well, first of all, it was not a dialogue. It was series of monologues, but there was so little soul. It was more about, oh yes, sustainability. Oh yes, that's big. Climate warming, that's a big issue. How do we frame this into the existing frameworks that we have of the financial sector so that this becomes a business opportunity, a big business opportunity? Hey, where is the existential danger? Where are the emotions? I mean, there was a lot of emotions from a lady who participated from Brazil, from indigenous communities in Brazil. That was really, she brought that humanity that was missing in the. And I asked a question, you know, Agent Provocateur, I asked a question at the end of a session on the role of boards of directors, you know, in big companies, etc., in promoting sustainability. And I asked, and what if we consider that members of boards are humans? what does he say? But well, just that. What if we consider that we have to invoke their humanity, not the rational mind of how does this fit in my framework and in my P&L account, you know? So this is, that was exactly I mean, what we're trying to do with the fifth element is that liberate the transformative potential of learning. The human revolution is happening often. It's happening in many places, I can tell you, often in communities which feel powerless and have no option but to learn. We're not thinking about long-term global issues, but about their own survival. Communities like in the townships in South Africa, where a colleague of ours in the Club of Rome, John Gilmore, has developed schools to give the message to the kids from the townships, the poorest areas in South Africa, that they are capable, as any other human, that they are capable. Or Karima Kadawi in Tangier with the Tamkin community, with extraordinary coincidence between people who didn't know each other, but have some commonalities. I'm not saying there is a recipe. It's the contrary of that. There is not a recipe, a universal recipe. But I'm saying that the people who, in a way, you define yourself as a catalyst, or you mention catalyst. Well, some people are able to catalyze huge transformations on the ground because of their personality. It's not that they drive everything. It's not that they teach people how to behave. No, they create the conditions for that process of transformation to happen by itself. And they allow people. A friend of mine, Nadia Sandi, says, well, this is about let's allow life to be again. Just allowing people to feel that they are capable. And then the potential, the transformative potential is already there, you know? And respect all cultures and threads of knowledge, as is implicit in the title, the fifth element, ancient wisdom and modern science. So I will not go into detail into this, but we developed depending on who listens to this, if it is a potential funder wanting to hear the word methodology, we say this is a methodology. But again, it's an invitation. It's an invitation in which at the center there is the fifth element. And there is a number of things, you know, which have in our view, have to happen, or questioning, you know, questioning the roles we play, questioning where are we learning, where, including physically, where are we, you know, questioning how we evaluate, you know, because often the problem with transformative process is that if we want to evaluate them according to conventional frameworks, we will do conventional things, not transformative things, and so on and so on. So you will have this presentation anyway, so I don't want to go too much in detail. One of the things we have learned, and this is, I think, essential, because it's the same, it's complexity, it's life. Life is complex, and life is complex because it is built on interdependencies, on relationships, on interdependencies. If you cut the relationships, or you want to control them, or you want to simplify, it's no more life. So I say to people, you have a choice, you know, but if you choose life, complexity comes with it. You have another option if you want to be simple, but it's not life anymore. So this means that we are so used to ignore the consequences of our actions because we ignore that we are not dealing with objects, and even objects, I would say, have their own way of being in the world. and existing. You might have seen that some pictures of how the sands of the Sahara go to the Amazon. So the sand is actually bringing life because that brings minerals to the soil in the Amazon, which is where life comes out. So even the border between living beings and non-living beings is very fuzzy. But in any case, for sure, all living beings, you cannot ignore that living beings are autonomous. Beautiful example that Bateson put on that is to make understand the difference. You know, it's between kicking a ball, and you can measure the trajectory of the ball, you know, depending on how you kick it, etc. And so that's classical mechanics. Okay, everything is understood, fine. And kicking a dog, who is a living being. Then you enter into the domain of what will happen, you know, of uncertainty. The dog is autonomous, has an autonomous living way of living, you know. So beware of that in everything we do, of dispossession, of the moment when we say, no, we can think for these people or living beings or ecosystems. We can be their representatives and think on behalf of them, and we will do the best for them. Come on. If they are autonomous, we are not entitled to say what is the best for them. So that's the fundamental learning, which is at the basis of different worldviews. Of course, this is present in many worldviews. Interestingly enough, it is not present in the modernist, in the reductionist worldview of modernity, in the sense of classical mechanics is the, you know, the paradigm by essence, which is not what the physicists do, by the way. But this idea is present in all ancient worldviews, and all, I mean, or most in different ways, or for sure, most schools of spirituality, if you wish. And I'm aware that I'm taking too much time, right? But I'm finishing. So just again, you have these, you will have this presentation. So what happens in the meetings like this that we are having? We had two in Switzerland, one in Paris, one in Cape Town. Now, for me, this is a fifth element meeting completely. What happens is that the people feel free enough to share what is really happening and what their feelings. And you see so much dissonances between the official level, the role they have to play in their everyday lives, and what they feel, because people are humans. Even members of boards are humans. So they know much more than this guy from BlackRock said literally. Well, as a citizen, I could say many more things on this stage. But as the vice chairman of BlackRock, this is what I have to say. He said that literally. So we are, you know, working with this emergence of dissonances, and how that dissonances could be an energy, a source of energy to make things move, you know, because this looks as a contradiction, you know, and terrible. Yeah, but it might be also a source of energy, because people, if you allow them again, allow life to be again, if you allow them to be themselves, they start thinking in different ways, you know, and they start having multiple descriptions of things and thinking, oh, one of the things which comes out, I never thought of that, or I never thought of that in that way, you know, and that's terribly exciting because it's human. And what we are trying to do is making shifts like these ones, you know, from stakeholders to people. There is no stakeholders, not enough. I mean, the stakeholder engagement is not enough nowadays. All stakes are at risk anyway. So the process of improving something through stakeholder engagement can work for certain types of improvements, but we are in a situation of existential risk. Forget about your stakes, guys, because in the planet without humanity, what were the stakes? And from teaching to learning, I mean, can talk about that, what the difference between teaching and learning, from colonial mindset to self-organization is a fundamental principle of life. We know that, but we don't use it so much or not at all in our societal arrangements. From the perception of scarcity to the perception of abundance, one of the things I learned from Africa and people around this Black consciousness movement is that I read in a book of the son of Steve Biko, Africa, there has always been a perception of abundance. The culture, the African cultures are based on a perception of abundance. And I can tell you, when I read that, I said, what? From my own Western perception. How could these people feel there is abundance? I mean, by our standards, they are poor, you know, they lack a lot of things, you know. How can they be in this perception of abundance? So interesting, you know, and so disruptive for our own way of thinking. And it's so different when you start thinking about the world. And the answer to that mystery is that they live in relational cultures. So the issue is, if you lose relationships, but you have always the potential not to run short of relationships, of human relationships, of relationships with living beings, with the nature, etc. They conceive that everything in terms of relationships, while we conceive our culture in terms of individuals, isolated individuals. And then there is scarcity, because then you compete with others. You know, immediately, if we are isolated individuals, it's a race of everybody against everybody else. Wow. But how does this shift happen? We don't know yet. We are just trying to understand how conditions could be created for something of that kind to happen by learning from concrete cases where people have already done that, and without applying a theory thought in a big university, but really on the ground. And this is some of the topics, but we might discuss that, some of them later. This is because what we are trying to do is also identifying a number of key questions that are not addressed yet. It's not about reinventing anything. It's not about the global Rome gives the solutions. No, not at all. It's all about collaboration and sensing what is already there. And this is why I'm here. It's exactly why I'm here, you know, to sense what is already here and build on that, build together, not reinvent. And one of the big questions is this, you know, because with so many people engaged in, intentionally engaged in trying to transform the world towards better conditions, why don't we have more movement in that direction? But in particularly, I mean, why don't they work together more? Why don't they resonate more together? Because, yeah, there are plenty of NGOs, etc., but they still live in a competitive world. So often you see that they compete. And often you see that there is the topic of narcissism, of egos blocking the resonance, the collaboration, you know? So could it be otherwise? Because the stakes are very high, you know, and well, many other topics, including can we reconnect the multiple ways of knowing so that they work together? because in particular, the role of art, I say often to provoke, art is, we have art as decoration, you know, as something nice, which is there, also part of the business, of the show business, you know, of the entertainment industry. But art is a fundamental way of knowing, which goes into the mystery, and which could be helpful, I don't know, which could be helpful for learning, you know, for changing. And that's very much it. Well, this is something we did in beginning of August, a declaration. Akili means meaning, African meaning. And it's a declaration we did from Cape Town on the values of Africa and how those values, how Africa should think about its future based on those values, on their own values. But in my view, also what the rest of the world could learn from that, you know. And as I said, you're all invited. I mean, you are already in, sorry to say. Thank you so much for listening, giving me the time for this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. I feel like we need a resonance break. I don't know, these two words, they don't seem to work, but take a break. And if you need a task, then it would be see how it can be all about resonance. And after that, 5 minutes, max 10, we have this final round where we're going to merge a couple of things: conversation, sharings, poetry, objects, whatever you brought as expressions of, you know, further developed future states, perhaps. You know, that's our idea now. You did take more time. You took beautifully. So all we need to do is kind of like, you know, bring things together in a little less time.
You know, I was provoked by you. By the previous conversation. Yeah.
So
I have to start in Hans to suggest just to have
5 minutes of feedback just to what Carlos said before we're going to break, because the break breaks.
okay.
And that's my strong feeling
Great.
to suggest that, if you're okay. And maybe 5 to 7 minutes, and
Go
then we
for it.
continue. What? Okay.
Let's do it. Super.
Okay.
You said yes.
Yes, it was. I mean, it's everything makes so much sense. And starting with this prosperity, to rephrase what is prosperity, because it is prosperity can be. This is prosperity. This, what happened is prosperity. So to rephrase what is prosperity. And for the fifth element, I mean, I saw the Vitruvian man there. I saw the Renaissance, like, I don't know, this is again, you know, coming out of the box, your inspiration to see how in the box. And then 500 years afterwards is the human revolution. And the Renaissance was the door into the modern world, which now are paying, right? Because we pay for that, for this stage. And we see this, and I see also the kind of the kids, because for me at the moment, what more struggle in these human evolutions is that the kids are coming to say something, they have the voice. And this never happened in the human history, that kids are telling us the truth and where to go. These were the things that yeah, and thousands of things. So
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It was very, very empowering. For me, there is a question that has been in my head for a long time, and then maybe we can, we'll discuss it also here. Because I see that many people, what you said about people working in corporations, and then it seems that there is a system that does not allow us to grow from the roots, because we have to be, actually, there's a system that obliges us to think in a certain way, because otherwise we're not useful parts of the system, we're out of the system. So I think it's fantastic that we're here, we are raising something, but then how far can that go? If from the top, you mentioned this, the vice president of BlackRock, I mean, all these people, you know, there is a system. So will there be a clash? Will the system change? For me, this is the question in my head.
Yeah, thank you as well very much. Very inspiring. No, but I think the BlackRock guy, for instance, that reminds me as well, because he fought hard the system to be at the top. So, and he sacrificed a lot as well to get there. So obviously he's not going to stand there and say, I just give it all up and just change my ways and do something completely different. So I think to get him on board, it takes quite a lot, or these kind of people, or maybe a new generation, actually.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Anything to be said?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for this presentation. Really nice. I have maybe a question and a thought about, you were saying something like, we don't want to see. We do not want to see. And I have a question regarding the way we experience life. Is it because we don't want to see, or we are not in capacity to see something? And because I have this quote from Einstein saying, we cannot solve a situation with the same level of consciousness we have created it. So is it about leveling the consciousness of people that we can maybe bring different questions on the top to solve those problems and to make people able to see? I don't know, what is your thought on that?
It's a very good question. I think to an extent it's inevitable, because I really think whatever we do, we cannot understand the whole and how it works. And it's an issue with, for instance, I come from this dynamical system background, and at some point I decided to stop talking about complex systems, because when people run away, you know, you don't you never get popular talking about complex systems. So not very practical, but also because it misses the point. You know, it's not that we cannot learn more and more. I don't think it is a matter of levels of consciousness. It's, or I phrase it in a different way, might be a matter of levels of learning, because of course we are learning all the time. We are, I mean, as we said, I mean, the evolution is two mechanisms at the same time. One which is slow, you know, or doesn't produce big changes, you know, but we change all the time. But everything, so we are already different persons than we were from the moment this meeting started. But a slow mechanism, and then these moments of criticality where something extraordinary can happen, and you can learn something at a different level, at a completely different level, and you can question your life. You question your life in deeper ways, but that can already happen. That can also happen. Typically, when we know but we don't want to see, what I say is that, well, we're still in this phase pre-criticality, you know, or the criticality happens somewhere else. So I think if the guy from BlackRock had said what he thinks as a citizen, it would have been extraordinarily interesting. Because I'm sure he is aware of many things. Actually, he was not at all in denial of climate warming, nothing like that. No. I'm sure he's completely aware. Yeah.
For me, this was a question, because
Okay, so for me, this was a question because you said that, okay, maybe people might act differently when they're asked what they think as humans, versus how they would act within a constraining system. But nobody is forcing you to enter in a constraining system, and whatever benefits or whatever feelings or sense of accomplishment you're receiving from being in that system is still a choice that you're making every day. So in the end, would that president be honest answering as a citizen or answering as a representative of BlackRock? What actually defines him? Because I think that's also
Yeah, the point is that something also we learn from, personally, I learned from Africa, and in the case of Nelson Mandela, is that the worst jails are the mental ones, especially if they are golden. So this guy from BlackRock lives, in a way, he has chosen to live in that golden jail, because he's literally saying, I'm powerless. No, literally it was because of fiduciary duty, I mean, many explanations of the constraining framework. But so he's saying, you know, I'm powerless to change that. No, you are not. Of course you are not. You could do many things. You could try to change from within. You could leave and try to live up to your values. But of course, it's very comfortable. I mean, I don't know the lifestyle of this guy, but you can imagine. He lives a very comfortable life and is not personally exposed to the criticality. And that's a big difference.
I think we're all very intrigued about this example, because at the end of the day, they are owners of the world. So when because they are, like, if you just look at all the organizations in the world, like, they are the main investors. So as owners of the world, then they should be able to drive whatever change they want to see. So, like, it's not possible, that shouldn't exist in their
But honestly, if you ask me, can we open the minds of the people at the top, you know, who are aware of the challenges, but living so comfortably in their golden mental jails that they do nothing? Can we open the jails, etc.? I don't know. I don't know if it could work. We are not inviting, for the moment, we are not inviting Mr. Trump to our Fifth Element meetings. We are starting with people that we feel are already somehow engaged or questioning themselves the situations. And there are. And just to mention an anecdote, which is, as he has shared publicly many times, so it's not a private thing, of somebody who is relevant in this city because he's the vice president of Roche. André Hoffman tells, the first time I went to the board, he's also a member of the Club of Rome, and the first time I went to the board, I asked the people, what does this company do for nature? You know, it comes from Luc Hoffman, so nature is very important for him, you know, and he asked, what do we do for nature? And the response he received is, oh, nature, good question. What we do is to make profits, and then you can devote some of that money to your nature thing. And this is, he says, this is exactly the example of why we are in the mess we are. Because it cannot be that way. The purpose cannot be, oh, you know what, we make profits, and then you can devote a little bit of money to try to repair the damage that you self as a company is creating. So there are also people like that, you know, in this sphere of people living 30,000 feet from above the ground and thinking good, you know, about themselves while they are powerless.
And we have a hand raised on the online. If we can give the space to the Evelyn or Catherine, anyone who want to share something.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm online.
We can hear you perfect and see you.
Thank you very much for the dialogue, and the presentation has been really inspiring. It resonated a lot with me, the whole systemic interconnected approach. And I would be fascinated to learn more about this African dialogue you mentioned and these African values. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's a fundamental thread in the fifth element. I will share with you in a few days a short paper that we have produced, you know, a 3-pager. It was meant to be a 2-pager, but in the end, we cannot make it in 2. We have to do it, and where we say, where we are weaving different threads, you know, and one of them is about this Black consciousness movement, which is fascinating because it was a very different approach to changing the world in which they were living. In the sense of course, it was against the apartheid, but not only in the basic political framing of fighting against at the political level, but fighting against at the mental level. And that was inspired by other people and the thinking, for instance, of Paulo Freire in Brazil. So pedagogies of, I call that pedagogies of liberation, which is about, and they started with this idea of, they were called at the time non-Europeans and non-white in their own land. So Steve Biko said the most powerful weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Mm-hmm. So it was from the very beginning a matter of liberation of minds by reconnecting with some of the fundamental values of their own cultures, one of them being, or the one at the center being, that everything is relational. That you have, you know, in Ubuntu, and you probably heard and learned something about that, but there are many different variants, but all of them with this idea of their relationality. I am because you are, and you cannot ignore that. You everything starts from there, and they say also now, you know, today they also say that has been, a lot of that has been destroyed, and they have to dig, to look for their own Ubuntu. They have to dig into themselves, because they have been exposed to centuries of Western development, colonization, and development, which is now neo-colonial in the sense of we are the developed, so-called developed world is saying to Africa, you have to do as us, you know. The correct human development is what we have done. Mm-hmm. But there is a richness of indigenous. But when we say indigenous, people tend to think about tribes in the Amazon, which is of course true. But we are all potentially indigenous. Mm-hmm. It's about becoming indigenous again. In Europe, it's a bizarre idea. You know, a friend of mine, a French anthropologist, is working on that. How could we reconnect with our own nature of indigenous, you know? We are also connected to the places from where we are. That richness is more alive in Africa in many ways, and it's fascinating, you know, to discover that, than today in Europe, and we have to learn from that. Mm.
Any final thought, guys, before we come to the closing? Because we want to wrap up in 10 minutes just to give a space for the lunch, that this can continue. But any final thought before we go into the wrap up? And the final wrap up, we want to invite everyone to share something, like even something to bring it back for wrapping up, but anything to say?
I would like to ask you how we are invited to participate in this study.
No, I mean, you are there already, don't worry. We are, you know, it's a journey of exploration. And so one of the most difficult things was to say to our founders, to present this idea, this crazy idea. And it's not finished because we want, one of the things we are doing is out of these conversations come out sort of community building, if you wish. I mean, at least, you know, relationships. So starts with sense, invite and sense, but in order to build relationships. And from those relationships, some things emerge, you know, some topics, some big questions, some opportunities. And what we do is also to try to develop those opportunities, not with everybody at the same time necessarily, with some of the partners we work, many are institutions in Switzerland, and that's deliberate, in order to identify, oh, we could do a project on that, or we could do an activity, maybe just an event on that, you know, and also to look for more resources to feed this. But that said, it's a journey of exploration. It's not, don't worry, guys, we have the plan. So I had to write something which looks like a proposal, a conventional proposal, without betraying the essence of this is a journey of exploration.
And it's also not a membership organization. Like I have to be part of this.
No, I mean, yeah, of course. So in that continuous process of defining what the hell is the fifth element, and honestly, we don't care because it's beyond. How can you define life? You cannot without referring to life. This is one of the limitations. This is why one of the reasons why we will never understand the whole, because the instruments we have to understand are language, one of them, but that language is limited. How do you define life without referring to life? How do you define love without referring to love? So you got it. You cannot define them, but you can sense them. You can live them. That's the extraordinary beauty, you know, that we are the most important things in life. You cannot define them, but you can live them. You can sense them. And that's what it is about. So don't worry, you are all included, not only invited, but included. As Heiko said, this is not a membership. Where do I register? No, don't worry. There are no fees, no nothing. Just be part of, try to be part of, I mean, with the things you are doing, Cynthia, you are trying to be part of this human revolution as well, I think. So.
Anything else that needs to be said before we go for the final round and completing the gathering today? Yes, please.
Yeah, I have maybe a question.
And yes.
I did it. Okay. I have a final thought, maybe a question, open question. I saw a lot of learning inside the slide. And I saw as well wisdom and science. And my thinking is, how could we, from the learning, create or transform this learning into wisdom to have a wise relationship with the world, with life?
Oh, wow. You only ask easy. I think. No, yeah, and I don't have the response, of course, but I think it starts with paying attention, paying a lot more of attention out of the usual framings, you know, paying attention to the fact that we have blind spots, recognize that we have blind spots, and then that starts opening the space of possibilities, because that gives the opportunity of, I never thought about that, or never thought about that in that way. But paying attention to the wisdom which already exists.
And then what Tom said, paying attention to the change. Because if you pay attention to blind spots, there's more learning
in paying their attention, but they're also more awareness about the change,
Yeah.
which then leads to learning again, which sort of fuels your wisdom. So there is some sort of a pulsing, I like to say.
Sometimes the thoughts have already a bias. Whatever you learn can be biased. So sometimes it's the gap between the thoughts. In these silent moments, you learn more.
But
No,
yeah, could you repeat because of
Yeah.
yes, it's on.
Hello? Yeah. I mean, the bias we have, we learn with bias.
Yep.
That's the tricky part. So you learn, and then I think in the silent, in the gaps between the thoughts, is this door, is this window to a different reality?
Absolutely, I think it's, but it makes a world of a difference. If you already know that we learn with bias, it's a big difference from thinking that we learn objective reality. We have objective knowledge. Then, because it opens the door to multiple descriptions and the in-betweens, and that makes a very nice connection with the poem that Sabrina read, and to the one quote from poets are visionaries, are people who connect in a mysterious way with the essence of life and use language to connect that with it, in mysterious ways, completely mysterious. So for instance, many years between the concept of information technologies or digitalization was coined, T.S. Eliot said the following: where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Wow. Coming back to your point, I mean, the wisdom is there. We just decided to disconnect from it.
And it's also connected with the idea of the tribe. Sometimes if you think different, you don't belong. This not belonging is a FOMO, no? The fear of missing out. It happens with the guy of you mentioned, but it happened also, I mean, in the cave of Plato. And it's all the time, it's the humans. We want to belong. We want to, be related. And this fear is also a bias to be different.
Well said.
Very well said. We are coming to kind of a closure. Lutz, do you have something that you want to propose for the wrap up? What do you think?
I do, as we were into poetry a little bit, and you just reconnected to it. I have Adam,
Yeah,
it works? Okay. I have another piece of poetry here in my hands, and it's an ode to life, which I think could be very nice as a preliminary closing, because we're going to have other closings. We're going to have something to eat and some, more of a conversation going on, and then so it never stops.
It's endless.
It's endless. And so this is a little bit longer one. It's called Hokusai Says. And Hokusai was a famous artist in Japan, second half of the 18th century, first half of the 19th century, who traveled a lot. And you may know his most famous piece of work, which is the Great Wave of Okinawa something. It's this huge wave in this little boat with a lot of people like underneath the wave. It became world famous. Now, Hokusai says, look carefully. He says, pay attention, notice. He says, keep looking, stay curious. Hokusai says, there is no end to seeing. He says, look forward to getting old. He says, keep changing, Just get more who you really are. He says, get stuck, accept it, repeat yourself as long as it's interesting. He says, keep doing what you love. He says, keep praying. He says, every one of us is a child. Every one of us is ancient. Every one of us has a body. He says, every one of us is frightened. He says, every one of us has to find a way to live with fear. He says, everything is alive. Shells, buildings, people, fish, mountains, trees. Wood is alive. Water is alive. Everything has its own life. Everything lives inside of us. He says, live with the world inside you. He says, it doesn't matter if you draw or write books. It doesn't matter if you saw wood or catch fish. It doesn't matter if you sit at home and stare at the ants on your veranda or the shadows of the trees and grasses in your garden. It matters that you care. It matters that you feel. It matters that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. Contentment is life living through you. Joy is life living through you. Satisfaction and strength is life living through you. He says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Love, feel, let life take you by the hand. Let life live through you.
Wow. My friend. Wow.
The poem is by Roger Keyes. And that's all that I can possibly add. And with that,
thank you, dear friends. And we're gonna have lunch now and beautiful food from this wonderful place that they organize food from also zero waste with people that is amazing the way they prepare food. So again, and the conversation continue. We shift and adapt and flow with this. And Lutz and myself, we kind of trying to host this space, but it's invitation for everyone here to also bring their own ideas, event, dynamic to what next things can happen. And this is an invitation. This is a community, and it's not only me and Lutz. It's like everyone can bring something and lunch or event or whatever. And we have things also they have, and Adam especially to be here on Saturday, and they have for open the doors and to offer the spaces. It's beautiful. And thank you, Adam, and thank you to all the team in the hub. That is a huge team also working on the comms, in the marketing and everything that really done from the heart. So thank you, guys.
and thank you guys out there. You're very much connected. We can feel you. Catherine, hello.
Thank you.
Evelyn, yes.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully next time you can join us also here and benefit from the amazing little bit of food and drinks we're going to have. we're going to think of you and yeah, hope to see you soon.
Yeah, enjoy the conversations.
Thank you
guys.
And thank you very much for the inspiring and impressions. And what I think it really gives a lot of courage that it's really happening at so many different places at the world. I think that gives a good feeling that so many things are happening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Great.
Yes. Amazing.
Really.